Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to be talking to you today about Proposition 114, that is the Colorado Wolf Reintroduction Ballot Measure. For many of you that I don't know, my name is Caitlin Catalino. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Colorado-based National Outreach Representative for Defenders of Wildlife. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, folks. I'm John Murtaugh. I'm a representative here for Defenders of Wildlife, based out of here, just outside of Denver, Colorado. And I use he, his, him pronouns. And yeah, we're really excited to have you here and talk a little bit more about this upcoming ballot vote that we're looking at here this November.
Exactly. It's pretty wild to think that in 3 weeks or so, ballots will begin arriving in your mailboxes. And so we appreciate this opportunity to speak with you about the historic decision that you're actually going to be taking part of, and that's answering the question, should gray wolves be in Colorado? So before we get started, I just wanted to thank you for your passion and your dedication and your support for wolf recovery. And we're excited to give you this presentation. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that as wildlife supporters across Colorado, we are collectively and virtually gathering today on the traditional territory of the Apache Nation, the Arapaho Nation, the Cheyenne Nation, the Ute Nation, the Pueblo tribes, and the Shoshone tribe. So let's take a moment to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous peoples whose land we stand on. Thank you. Awesome. So John, I'll turn it over to you to get us started.
Great. And folks, just to make this a little simpler, we're just going to turn off our videos so we can focus on the presentation here a little bit better. We will have an opportunity for questions afterwards. And of course, we'll be sharing our contact info with you as well if you want to follow up with us by email with any questions. So just a little agenda to kind of get us started, a flow of how this is going to go. We're largely going to start by going over a little bit of the history of wolves in Colorado, talk about why Colorado is such an important part of this species recovery, and I talk a little bit about some of the impacts that this might have on the state. Finally, we'll discuss exactly what the ballot measure does and how you can help to get involved. To start off, I want to back up a little bit and discuss a really important part of this conversation, which is this idea of shared values. Of course, whenever the conversation of wolves come up, it tends to be a pretty divisive conversation. There's a lot of passions over this issue. But one thing that I have found is a shared value among virtually all Coloradans is that we love our wilderness. Regardless of how you approach it, regardless of how you use wilderness, that is something in common that we all share. And focusing on those shared values is a really important strategy for communication. Make sure we're validating one another. Of course, we have a bit of a threat to this shared value. That's that the absence of these wolves for roughly 80 years now has had an impact on our ecosystem. Good science makes clear that native species, especially carnivore apex predators like the wolf, are important to the integrity of our ecosystem. Well, we have a solution to this threat, and that's rather simple in principle. And that solution, of course, is to restore wolves here to Colorado. And that can be done through a responsible and science-based plan that bears in mind all stakeholders who will be impacted. So, of course, this is a little bit of what we would love to see one day right here in Colorado. This photograph was taken a little bit further north, our neighbors up in Montana. But this is certainly what we're hoping one day the wolf can be home in the Southern Rockies as well as the North. Just a little bit of background about where gray wolves historically lived. This map here gives you kind of a rough idea of the historic range of the gray wolf. Now you will notice in the southeast corner there that is not marked as part of the historic range. That's because that area actually was the historic range of another species of wolf called the red wolf. However, these are the only two species that have ever lived in the United States, the gray wolf and the red wolf, with roughly 2 million gray wolves in the United States at one point. Regionally, we do hear a little bit about subspecies. And I'll just touch on this just for a moment. This subspecies distinction is largely a regional specification, talking about a specific region where wolves may have historically been found. However, these different subspecies of the gray wolf are all considered gray wolves. They are all native to North America and the United States. And then you'll see right there again in that lower right, just as an example of what the red wolf looks like. Gray wolves were historically found distributed widely throughout Colorado. Here in this map was taken from the congressionally mandated study that Larry Bennett conducted in the early 90s, just before the reintroduction into Yellowstone. And based on historic accounts that he was able to find, this is an approximate distribution of wolves right around the turn of the 20th century. So you can see gray wolves were historically present throughout the state. Brief little history here. Before human colonization, European colonization of North America, we had about 2 million wolves roaming. But around the 19th century, things started to change. In the 1870s, 69 there, we had our first bounty issued here in Colorado on wolves. And that was part of a anti-predator program that led to the extirpation of gray wolves, and in many cases, in some states, coyotes, mountain lions, and bears. Now, what I mean by extirpation is that they are no longer living where they used to live. This is different from extinct, meaning that the species can still be found, but they can no longer be found in their historic range. That is the case with the gray wolf today. The last gray wolf was killed here in the state of Colorado in 1943. And about 30 years later, we as a nation began to take some action when the Endangered Species Act was passed, and we recognized the critical need for some of these native species. Well, here in Colorado, we have looked at reintroducing wolves for some time. It was an active conversation throughout the 80s and 90s, with the commission here in the state taking a look at this issue specifically in 1982 and 1989, again in 2004, each time declining to participate in a reintroduction. Well, in 2020, after so many years of working through the polls, working through the science, and watching what's happened to our northern states over the past 25 years, we decided the time was now, and it was time for a historic vote. This November will represent a historic opportunity. It's going to be the first time that the voters will be able to make their will known and to empower our state agency to reintroduce wolves. I'll talk a little bit more about those specifics here a little bit later. But I want to circle back a little bit here to Larry Bennett's study, his 1994 study that Congress ordered, which found that Colorado can support a maximum regional population of about 1,100 wolves. In this report, Larry Bennett suggests Colorado might have suitable range for about 400 to 800 wolves. So this is just to kind of give us a little bit of perspective of what is ecologically possible here in Colorado. But of course, why Colorado? Well, Colorado represents one of the last remaining and best suitable habitats for wolves. If you look over here at this map we have on the left, you can see that Colorado represents kind of a missing piece in the connectivity of wolves. With the gray wolf restored to Colorado, we will have that connectivity from the Arctic all the way down to Mexico. And that's very important for the genetic exchange of wolves. We have ideal habitat here in Colorado. Just on the western slope, we're looking at over 17 million acres of public land, and we have excellent prey base. In fact, Colorado is able to boast the largest elk herd in the United States. So there's plenty of land, plenty of food, and plenty of opportunity for wolves here in Colorado, and that's critical to restoring that corridor. Of course, we have actually had a few wolves in the state before. Following the 1995 reintroduction, the first confirmed wolf appeared in 2004. Unfortunately, that wolf was found dead by a vehicle collision off of I-70 just outside Idaho Springs. And there have been several other wolves reported and confirmed in the state since then. Most recently, a pack was discovered in northwestern Colorado. And this is actually the first pack in Colorado in over 80 years. So it was really exciting. But you can see most of the wolves that end up coming to Colorado, they don't stick around. Unfortunately, they either disappear or pass away before they're ever able to find another wolf to start a family with. And that's a very important distinction. And the reason for this actually has a lot to do with Wyoming. I will quickly mention we do have a Mexican gray wolf population to the south in New Mexico, but because of the laws surrounding how those wolves are managed, they are not allowed to go north and come into Colorado. There are only about 120 of those individuals. They are carefully managed, and if they are found outside of their recovery area, they're brought back. So instead, we have to look at Wyoming for a potential source of wolves coming in on their own. But you can see here in the combination of maps, on the left, that's a map of suitable habitat. You'll notice there's a big gap in southern Wyoming there. And also here on the right, when you look at how the management areas are in Wyoming, this big blue section labeled the Predatory Animal Management Area. Within that area, there are absolutely no rules on how wolves can be killed. You do not need a license. There's no regulation. It's basically wide open, and Wyoming artificially tries to keep the population of wolves in that area suppressed. As a result, it's very difficult for wolves to get here. They have to travel through really exposed territory where they can and are hunted. Because of this, not a lot of wolves have made it on their own, and it is unlikely that wolves will be able to come to Colorado in sufficient numbers to create a self-sustaining population without a reintroduction. Another part of this conversation we often hear is that wolves are going to, destroy elk and deer populations, but we haven't seen that. In fact, in the northern Rocky Mountain states of Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, all three states have higher elk populations today than they did before the reintroduction of gray wolves. In fact, in some cases, such as in Montana, we see populations 50% over objective. Of course, those are the management goals set by the state wildlife agency. And that's because there's a little bit of a difference too in how people and humans hunt big game. Wolves tend to have a positive impact on the health of their prey. That's because they're selective hunters. It is very difficult to bring down a meal when you have to catch your food with your teeth. Wolves are routinely injured and sometimes even killed in the hunt, and they only have about a 15% success rate on the hunt. Well, we studied the hunt here in Yellowstone and found that the average age of elk cows killed by humans was around 6.5, whereas with wolves it was much closer to 14 years. That's because when it is so challenging to catch your prey, you want to go for the easy stuff. And that means often the sick, the injured, or the old. Now, by doing that, what happens is the wolf is removing bad genetics from the herd. Only the strong survive to breed. And as a result, that tends to thin out weaknesses in the herd, which can also include disease that may otherwise spread throughout the herd. On the other side of this, there's a sometimes unfortunate prey of the wolf, which would be livestock. Now, wolves will occasionally take livestock. It is certainly not their preferred prey, but again, it can sometimes become easy. However, I think it's important to look at what this figure really looks like. So right here is a map of the Northern Rocky Mountains in 2015. Each of these black dots represents where a documented wolf pack was. Based on this, we were able to come up with a population of cattle that live in the same area as wolves. From an inventory of about 1.6 million cows, 148 were confirmed to have been lost to wolves, which represents a loss rate of 0.01%. Now, this is important to point out because it demonstrates that wolves are not a threat to the livestock industry. However, these losses can occur in a localized region, and that can put a lot of pressure on an individual. That's why compensation programs are so important. We recognize that this can be a challenge for some folks. And if they happen to lose livestock because of wolves, we want to make sure that financial burden doesn't lie on them. Well, Defenders has actually been a part of this conversation for quite some time. We created a wolf compensation trust in 1987 to help reimburse and make whole these losses. Now, in total, throughout 1987 to 2009, we paid out about $1.2 million. And you can see a little bit right here. This will kind of break down what those payments looked like. Now, this program was dissolved by Defenders and transitioned into a preventative fund instead of a reimbursement fund around 2008. And that's because at that time, federal funds became available to pay for compensation. We were able at that time to help transition Montana from that state level to federal level funding with about $100,000. And since then, as I mentioned, this program has shifted into a proactive fund, which means we are now helping to fund and explore different tools and techniques that can be used to make sure the losses don't occur in the first place. This is a pretty simple mantra I try to keep in mind all the time. And it's that we don't want wolves to die because of livestock, and we don't want livestock to die because of wolves. There is a way to make that happen. And this is a much bigger conversation that I won't take up too much time with here, but there are a number of tools and techniques that can be used. I do want to point out this takes a lot of work and careful management and adaptation to the given ranch or operation. And I say this because it's not as simple as simply hiring a range rider or getting a few livestock guardian dogs. There is a little bit more that goes into it, but it can be done. In fact, many of our partners throughout the Northern Rockies have been practicing these techniques and as a result have seen very, very few, if any, losses to wolves. And we're really helping push that agenda a little bit more too. In fact, just last year, we were able to work with Congress to appropriate $1.3 million for wildlife services. Wildlife Services is a part of the USDA, and they're largely responsible for dealing with conflicts between wildlife and livestock. Fortunately, what this funding allows us to do is it has allowed us to put into the field a number of non-lethal specialists. That means wildlife service agents who are not allowed to take lethal action against wildlife. They must keep their focus on these preventative and non-lethal methods. And while I can't say for certain what this will look like in Colorado and what our involvement will be, I am very confident that we will continue to advocate for compensation, preventative measures, and to continue to work on advancing this conversation. I want to talk just a little bit here about the past polling that's happened in Colorado. As I mentioned earlier, this has been a conversation in the state for about 40 years now. But just looking at the past 25 years or so, you can see a number of polls that have been conducted here, routinely demonstrating over 65% broad support for wolf restoration in the state. Coloradans have made clear for decades their desire to see wolves. Yet, the political process that historically has made this decision has barred that value from being a part of the conversation. Of course, here in Colorado, we have the benefit of citizen referendums. We can create a ballot initiative, and in doing so, have our government more accurately reflect the values of Coloradans. Of course, just a little mention here, we have had some notable endorsements as well. Former U.S. Senator Mark Udall and former Colorado Governor Bill Ritter, as well as over 70 conservation organizations, both here in Colorado and across the nation, making clear that this is a high value. This is something Coloradans and Americans alike are really excited about. We want to see this historic and iconic species recovered throughout the West. Colorado represents that missing piece. Now, just to get into the details just a little bit here and talk about what Ballot Proposition 114 does, and perhaps a little bit easier is to say what it does not do. Ballot Proposition 114 simply asks if we want Colorado Parks and Wildlife to begin a reintroduction. And that's about it. It does not say how many wolves, where they will come from, how they will be managed, where they will be released. That's because we recognize that these are decisions that Colorado Parks and Wildlife will have to make following public hearings and using the best scientific data available. What we are asking the voters this November is simply a values-based question. Do we, the people of Colorado, want our Parks and Wildlife Agency to begin a reintroduction? If so, all power then goes to that state agency to decide on these management decisions. So there's a little bit of the background on it. I'm going to turn things over to Caitlin at this point to talk a little bit more about what you can do to get involved.
Awesome. Thanks, John. So hopefully after hearing John's presentation, you are really energized to help out. And as a voter, there's a really important role that every Coloradan can play to help promote the passage of Proposition 114. So on the next slide here, let's just for a quick moment, think about some of the big picture items as we're moving through this sort of promotion and sort of campaign phase. Defenders is one piece of the puzzle, so we're honored to be speaking with you today and sharing this information. But there is an organization called the Rocky Mountain Wolf Action Fund that's really the main driver for this campaign. And Defenders is a coalition member along with a number of wildlife conservation organizations, scientists, and passionate individuals. But we are again just the one piece, and so Defenders is taking on some of the organizing tasks to help Coloradans, promote this effort and then sort of help encourage voter turnout, that sort of thing. But some of the other tasks are being directed by some of our conservation partners. So if there are some activities that you're specifically interested in, and Defenders isn't really taking the lead on that, I will be happy to make sure that I am connecting you with other organizations or other individuals as appropriate. The other important thing to keep in mind is that campaigning across the board looks so much different right now. So this is all the way from big presidential elections to smaller community efforts. This is simply a new territory. We are in a situation where we are social distancing. There are not community gatherings where we can share information. So we're all sort of learning as we're going. In previous elections, you would hear experts say things like boots on the ground or what wins the races, and that's just not going to be the case this year. So I think traditionally you would think about handing out flyers or doing literature drops at homes or canvassing, knocking on doors and asking people if they're going to support Proposition 114. In this virtual age, in this sort of digital space, we are looking at tools that are going to be more remote, more small community-based word of mouth things, digital and virtual tools. And then the other thing to be reminding yourself is that timing is critical. Colorado has mail-in ballots hitting the mailboxes soon. And so for us here in Colorado, we have almost a 3-week window to be thinking about and making decisions about this election. For many people, those decisions may already be made. And so they might be receiving their ballot, filling it out, and getting it turned back in immediately. So it's important to think about when we are talking about promotion of Proposition 114 and spreading the word and spreading the message. It's not just going to be the week before the election. It might actually be important to start thinking about that now, so that when ballots do arrive at folks' doors, that they are already thinking about Proposition 114. I'm going to say yes on that. So a little bit about what we can do right now, what we can do in this virtual space. The most important thing is for you to talk and inform and to educate your friends and your family and people in your community. I cannot stress how important it is for you as a credible source to your friends and family to be sharing information about why it's important to say yes on Proposition 114. If you think about voters, they may not recognize Defenders of Wildlife. They may not know who the Rocky Mountain Wolf Action Fund is, but they know you. They know you as your friend or your family member or the neighbor, and they're going to value what you have to say and take into account your position on this sort of thing. So Defenders can be there to provide you resources if there's any specific technical questions about what Proposition 114 does. But sharing your position, sharing your interest in seeing wolves back in Colorado, sharing that passion is what can be so influential as you're talking with fellow voters. social media is going to become a really big part of this equation. I know that many people are probably already sort of feeling that social media fatigue. There's been a lot of things posted and things shared, and you're looking at ads and videos and that sort of thing on elections sort of across the board. But this is really one of the best ways to continue to share your message. And it doesn't have to be anything terribly fancy or professional. If you're sharing articles that you see that are really interesting, for example, the Denver Post just recently endorsed Proposition 114. This is the Denver Post editorial board did that. This is a really huge accomplishment and so exciting for the campaign. That is an excellent article to share on your social media page. It's important to use hashtags where you can. Hashtags are just a really easy way of being able to sort of gather and see where all of this this information is lying, and you can sort of see where who's supporting it, maybe what regions people are supporting it in. There's a lot of good metrics that you can use with hashtags. So some of this social media stuff may seem like, oh, I don't really know what I would do or what I would share. So as we can, Defenders will help you with that information. We call them social media toolkits. We'll be able to provide them for you so that you have ideas about these hashtags to use, or ideas about articles to post, or even just helping you think about what is your own reason you're supporting this? Why would you, if you had to write it in a sentence or two on a Facebook post, what is that reason that you support Proposition 114? The other thing that you can do is write pro-wolf letters to the editor. I cannot stress how important letters to the editor are, especially in this virtual space. The editorial pages, the opinion pages of newspapers are very widely read, especially right now as we're sort of entering that election phase. And it's a really great way for you to be able to share your message in a really wide and open sort of public venue without having to figure out how to get 100 people into a building. It's a great way to influence other voters. It's a great way to dispel myths, because we're seeing a lot of those right now. Defenders is happy to help you with this. We have a submission guideline document that includes submission information for a number of newspapers across the state. It also includes some talking points, some tips for how to, maybe most effectively submit your LTE. And we also include a sample LTE, which you can sort of use as like a template. You can copy and paste some of it. We want to encourage you to personalize it, because again, that's what's going to make you stand out in this sea of voters, is making sure that you are sharing your message about why this is important to you. So feel free to reach out to Defenders for some help there. But again, one of the most effective things that you can do right now. The other thing that we're really looking forward to working with Coloradans on is getting local elected officials to endorse officially Proposition 114. So unfortunately at this point, just over half of Colorado's 64 counties have officially released statements or passed resolutions opposing Proposition 114. So it's important that we are countering that with some endorsements of our own. And John in a previous slide mentioned some of these notable individual endorsements from folks like former Senator Mark Udall and former Governor Bill Ritter. But having local, credible endorsements as well is really, really influential. And it can be a relatively easy process. I don't want to say easy across the board, but we also have a fact sheet that we can share with you that talks about why elected official endorsements are really critical. It has some contact information, so it has a sort of directory for county commissioners, both email and some are phone numbers, ways to figure out who your state representative is, who your state senator is, and then ways of suggestions for how to contact them. We also include a sample letter that you could personalize and send. Again, we want to make sure that it's important that they realize that it's coming from an actual person. It's not this form letter from an organization. It's coming from a constituent of theirs, someone who lives in their community, who has important, strong feelings to share about Proposition 114. And this is also a great opportunity if you know a candidate that's running for office. you can talk with them about adding Proposition 114 to their platform. So lots of really great ways that we can get elected officials engaged on this issue. And finally, another tactic that's going to be used a lot is going to be phone banking. So since we're not, getting out to the streets and meeting people, chatting with them on the phone is going to be a great way to make sure that folks know that this is on the ballot. Make sure that they know your ballots have been mailed to you. Keep an eye out for them. So as I mentioned earlier, Defenders is working in coalition on this effort. And so this is actually one of the efforts that we aren't running on our own, but we are supporting our partners, the Sierra Club, in running the phone banking. So if you are interested in participating in phone banking specifically, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to connect you. It's something that they're hosting, I think almost daily for the next few weeks leading up to the election. They will you sort of get on a Zoom session. So even though you're not in a room with folks sort of feeding off of each other's vibes and excitement, you're on a Zoom call. You'll all be on mute as you're speaking with other folks, but you can see faces. There's going to be opportunities to chat, either share some successes, provide some words of encouragement. If you have questions, there'll be experts there that can help answer them for you. But they'll train you, they'll provide you with a script, they'll make sure you have everything that you need to get started. And then it's a real awesome community feel to helping folks, get the word out about Proposition 114. And if you haven't guessed already by some of the things that I've mentioned, truthfully, Defenders is here to help. We want to be supportive. We know that Coloradans are going to play a really critical role in helping to get the word out about Proposition 114. So we are here to help. If you are interested in sort of keeping up on some of the updates, getting the newest and latest information and some tips about what you can do, feel free to sign up to be a Pactivist. You can email me. My email is right there on the slide. Pactivists are basically self-identified volunteers who are specifically interested in working on Proposition 114. And I'm in communication with them. I'm providing information, resources, articles, all those kind of good information, so that you can feel like you are informed yourself, but also in a good place to share this information out with your community. So there's lots of things that Defenders can do to help. We can provide you with materials and toolkits. I've sort of mentioned that social media toolkits might be coming your way. Connect you with resources if you have questions about, sort of the more technical side of the ballot measure, or you're looking for some scientific articles to share with someone, let us know about that. If you just want to have a person look over your letter to the editor or your endorsement letter, or maybe you're going to write a quick little blurb about Proposition 114 for your local HOA newsletter or your community newsletter, we are happy to review those things for you. My boss would be thrilled to hear that I spent a day reviewing letters to the editor for our Coloradans. It's just being able to support you in that way is really important to us. And then finally, we're here to bounce ideas off of. There can be some really unique ways that folks are still able to engage in this election, even though we're getting close here. So if you have ideas about something that you are interested in, maybe a specific skill or passion that you have, and you haven't quite heard me say the right thing that really draws your attention, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to sort of just bounce ideas off of and share information with you and help you formulate something that you feel really great about and really powerful about. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll be happy to take some questions, but I did want to flag that John and I did throw our contact information on this slide. So please feel free to reach out to us. There's no question too small or too big. And again, we just wanted to thank our coalition partners in this effort. So Defenders is honored to be working with a team of passionate individuals and groups, both through the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project and the sister organization, the Rocky Mountain Wolf Action Fund. We are really excited to be sort of walking alongside these two really amazing organizations with the hope of come November 4th, being able to start switching gears to getting wolves on the ground here in Colorado. John, any final words that you'd like to say?
No, I think that's great. That about covers covers it all. So, any outstanding questions, of course, don't hesitate to shoot us an email, and I think we'll end the recording here, but then we'll switch over to take some questions here live.